What happens when a laid-back Hollywood star walks into a conversation that suddenly turns into a full-on debate he didn't expect? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The camera opens on the familiar round table, the energy already lively as the hosts settle in. Whoopi Goldberg leans back slightly in her chair, glancing across the table with a knowing smile. Sunny Hostin is flipping through her notes, focused. Joy Behar looks amused before anything has even started. The audience is warm, clapping as the segment begins. Whoopi gestures toward the side of the stage. All right, everybody, we've got a guest today who, let's be honest, needs no introduction. The audience cheers as Chris Hemsworth walks out, smiling, relaxed, waving as he takes his seat. Joy leans in immediately. You see? That's what I'm talking about. People just lose their minds when he walks out. Chris laughs, settling into his chair. I don't know about that, but thank you. That's a very warm welcome. Sunny smiles politely, but watches him closely. You've been busy. New projects, interviews everywhere, but also, you've been making headlines for something else. Chris raises an eyebrow slightly. Oh, that sounds ominous. The audience chuckles lightly. Whoopi cuts in, keeping things balanced. We'll get to that. First, how are you? Because last time you were here, things were calmer. Chris nods. Yeah, life's good. Busy but good. Spending time with family, trying to keep things balanced. Joy jumps in. Balanced? With your schedule? Come on. Chris laughs. I try. Doesn't always work, but I try. Sunny leans forward now, tone shifting just a bit. And when you say balanced, do you include the public conversations you've been part of recently? There's a subtle shift in the room. The audience quiets slightly. Chris glances at her, still calm. I assume you're referring to some of the comments that have been circulating? Sunny nods. Exactly. Because a lot of people feel like you've been defensive. A few murmurs ripple through the audience. Chris takes a breath, still composed. Defensive or just responding? Joy raises her eyebrows. Ah, here we go. Whoopi looks between them. Okay, let's unpack it. Sunny, what's the concern? Sunny sits up straighter. The concern is accountability. When you're someone with a platform like yours, what you say and how you respond to criticism matters. And some people feel like instead of listening, you've been pushing back. Chris nods slowly, considering. I think there's a difference between pushing back and explaining your position. Sunny doesn't back off. But explanation can sometimes sound like dismissal, especially when people are expressing genuine concerns. The audience gives a soft sensing the tension building. Chris leans forward slightly now, more engaged. I hear that. I really do. But I think there's also an expectation sometimes that you're supposed to just agree with everything being said about you. And that's not always fair. Joy interjects quickly. Nobody's asking you to agree with everything, but maybe not argue with everything either. Chris smiles faintly. I don't think I argue with everything. Sunny tilts her head. It can come across that way. There's a pause. Chris looks at her directly, still calm but more focused. I think what happens is people see a headline or a short clip, and they assume the tone. But the full conversation is often very different. Sunny responds immediately. But perception matters, Chris. Chris nods. It does. But so does context. The audience reacts with a mix of claps and murmurs. Whoopi raises a hand slightly. All right. This is why we have these conversations. Let's keep it real but also fair. She turns to Chris. So from your side, what do you think people are missing? Chris takes a moment before answering. That I'm not trying to dismiss anyone. I'm just trying to be honest. And sometimes honesty isn't perfectly packaged. Joy smirks. That's one way to put it. Sunny doesn't smile this time. But honesty can still be mindful. Chris nods. Absolutely. And I try to be. But I'm also human. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. The audience claps lightly at that. Sunny crosses her arms loosely, not aggressively, but clearly not done. And when you get it wrong, do you feel like you've acknowledged that? Chris meets her gaze. Yes, when I believe I have. There's a slight tension in that answer. The audience senses it. Joy leans back. That's a careful answer. Chris chuckles. It's an honest one. Whoopi watches closely, stepping in before it escalates too quickly. Part of this is also the nature of being in the public eye. Everything gets amplified. Sunny nods, but adds, that's true, but it also means responsibility gets amplified. Chris responds, more firmly now. And I don't run from that responsibility. But I also won't accept being misrepresented. The audience reacts, some clapping, some murmuring. Joy looks at Whoopi. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Whoopi nods slowly. Yeah, we are. Sunny leans in again, her tone sharper but still controlled. So you're saying the criticism isn't valid? Chris shakes his head immediately. No, I'm saying not all of it is accurate. Sunny presses. Which parts? A brief silence. Chris exhales lightly, choosing his words carefully. The parts where people assume intent, where they decide what I meant instead of asking. The audience goes quiet again. Sunny responds, but sometimes intent doesn't matter as much as impact. That line lands. A few audience members clap. Chris nods slowly, acknowledging it. That's fair. Impact matters. But if we don't talk about intent, we don't actually solve anything. We just stay in reaction mode. Joy raises her hands slightly. Okay, that's a point. Sunny looks at him steadily. Or we hold people accountable so they think more carefully next time. Chris leans back slightly now, still calm but clearly more engaged than when he walked out. I'm all for accountability. But accountability should be based on truth, not assumptions. The tension is now fully present, but controlled. The audience is hooked. Whoopi glances between them, then at the audience. All right, we're just getting started here. The audience laughs nervously, sensing there's much more to come. Chris gives a small smile, but his posture is more serious now. Sunny doesn't look away. And the conversation clearly isn't cooling down anytime soon. The room holds that quiet tension for a second longer than usual. The kind that only happens when both sides know the conversation just crossed into something real. Whoopi leans forward slightly, her tone steady but curious. All right, so let's stay right there, because this is where it gets interesting. Sunny says impact matters more than intent sometimes. You're saying intent still has to be part of the conversation. So how do you meet in the middle? Chris exhales lightly, nodding. By actually talking to each other instead of talking about each other. A few claps break out from the audience. Sunny doesn't react to the applause. She keeps her eyes on him. But people have been talking to you, Chris. Journalists, critics, even fans, and the response they're seeing is you pushing back. Chris shakes his head slightly. Or me explaining. Joy jumps in with a half smile. You really like that word, explaining. Chris smiles back briefly. Because that's what I'm doing. Sunny tilts her head. But explanation can feel like justification. The audience gives that familiar, oh reaction. Chris leans forward a little more now, hands clasped. Only if you assume that I'm trying to justify something wrong. What if I'm just saying, hey, that's not actually what happened? Sunny responds quickly. Then why do so many people feel like they're not being heard? There's a slight pause. Chris doesn't answer immediately this time. Joy glances at Whoopi. That's the question right there. Whoopi nods. Yeah, because perception doesn't come from nowhere. Chris finally speaks, slower now. I think sometimes people project their own expectations onto you. And when you don't meet them, it turns into disappointment, and then criticism. Sunny raises her eyebrows. So now it's on the audience? Chris shakes his head immediately. No, I'm not blaming the audience. I'm saying it's a two-way street. Sunny leans back slightly, but her tone stays firm. Because it sounds like you're saying people are misunderstanding you, instead of considering that maybe your message wasn't clear. The audience murmurs again. Chris nods. That's fair. And I'll own that. Sometimes I could communicate better. I'm not perfect at this. That gets a small round of applause. Joy points at him. Okay, that's the first time you've said that plainly. Chris laughs. I thought I said that earlier. Joy smirks. Not that plainly. Whoopi chuckles softly, then turns to Sunny. All right, so he's acknowledging that. Where do you go from there? Sunny pauses for a second, choosing her words. Acknowledgement is a start, but it's not the whole thing. People want to see reflection, and sometimes change. Chris nods slowly. And what if the change people want isn't actually who you are? That line shifts the energy again. Sunny answers without hesitation. Then maybe the conversation is about growth. Chris looks at her carefully. Or about authenticity. Joy leans in, intrigued. Oh, I like this, growth versus authenticity. Whoopi gestures between them. Go ahead, break that down. Sunny speaks first. Growth means you listen, you learn, and you evolve. Especially when people tell you something you said hurt them. Chris responds calmly. And authenticity means you don't become someone else just to avoid criticism. The audience splits, some clap for Sunny, some for Chris. Joy laughs. See, now we've got teams forming. Whoopi smiles slightly. That's what happens when it's a real conversation. Sunny turns back to Chris. But those two things aren't mutually exclusive. You can grow and be authentic. Chris nods. I agree. But growth shouldn't mean abandoning your perspective entirely. Sunny leans forward again. No one's asking you to abandon it, just to examine it. Chris responds, a little more intensity in his voice now. And I do examine it. Constantly. But I don't think people always see that part. Sunny's tone softens just slightly, but her focus doesn't waver. Then maybe that's part of the issue. What you think you're showing isn't what people are seeing. There's a quiet pause after that. Chris looks down briefly, then back up. That's possible. Joy nods slowly. That's a big admission. Chris shrugs lightly. It's an honest one. Whoopi watches him closely. So what do you do with that? Chris leans back, thinking for a moment. You keep having conversations like this, even when they're uncomfortable. The audience claps more firmly now. Sunny nods once. I can respect that. There's a small shift in the energy, still tense but slightly more open. Joy glances at Sunny. You're not letting him off that easy though, right? Sunny gives a faint smile. No. The audience laughs. Sunny turns back to Chris, her tone sharpening again, but not aggressively, more pointed. Because here's the thing, when you say you're being misrepresented, it can sound like you're dismissing the very real reactions people are having. Chris answers immediately this time. I'm not dismissing reactions. I'm questioning the accuracy of what they're reacting to. Sunny counters. But the reaction itself is still real. Chris nods. Absolutely. And I respect that. But if the foundation of that reaction is based on something incomplete or taken out of context, shouldn't I be allowed to address that? Joy raises her hand slightly. Yes, but how you address it matters. Chris looks at her. I agree. Sunny adds, tone matters. Delivery matters. And sometimes, the way something is said can make things worse. Chris takes that in, nodding slowly. That's fair. There's a brief pause where the tension dips, but not completely. Whoopi steps in again, sensing the moment. You know what's interesting? This isn't really about one comment or one situation. This is about how people communicate in general now. Joy nods. Everything's instant. Everything's clipped. Nobody gets the full story. Sunny agrees partially. That's true, but that doesn't remove responsibility from the person speaking. Chris responds, and it doesn't remove responsibility from the people interpreting. The audience reacts again, some claps, some murmurs. Joy laughs lightly. We're going in circles, but in a good way. Sunny glances at her, then back at Chris. All right, let me ask you this directly. Have you ever read a reaction to something you said and thought, okay, I see why that upset people? Chris pauses longer this time. The room gets quieter. Finally, he nods. Yes. Sunny doesn't move. And what did you do with that? Chris answers honestly. Sometimes I responded. Sometimes I didn't. And sometimes, I just took it in and sat with it. That answer lands differently, more reflective. Joy looks at him closely. Sat with it? Chris nods. Yeah, because not everything needs an immediate response. Sometimes you need to actually process it before you say anything. Whoopi smiles slightly. That's something a lot of people could learn from. The audience claps. Sunny studies him for a moment. And after you sat with it, did it change anything? Chris exhales slowly. In some cases, yes. Sunny tilts her head. But not all. Chris shakes his head. No, not all. Sunny nods, almost as if confirming something in her mind. That's where the frustration comes from. The tension starts to rise again, not explosive, but steady. Joy leans forward, sensing it. We're not done yet. Whoopi smiles knowingly. Not even close. Chris adjusts slightly in his chair, more serious now than when he first walked out. Sunny sits upright, ready to push further. And the conversation is clearly about to go even deeper. The pause lingers just long enough for the weight of that last exchange to settle in. You can feel the audience leaning in now, not just entertained, but invested. Whoopi looks between them, her voice calm but deliberate. All right, so we've established there's frustration on both sides. Sunny's saying people feel unheard. You're saying you're being misunderstood. So let's take it a step further. She turns to Chris. What's the hardest part of being in that position, where everything you say is picked apart? Chris lets out a quiet breath, his posture more grounded now than when he first walked out. Honestly, it's the assumption that you're not listening. That part gets to me. Sunny responds immediately, not letting the moment soften too much. But perception doesn't come out of thin air. If people feel that way, something is leading them there. Chris nods. I agree. But I think sometimes what leads them there isn't the full picture. It's a fragment of it. Joy leans in, curious. So you're saying the reaction is based on an incomplete version of you? Chris gives a small nod. Yeah. And that's frustrating, because you can't correct every version of yourself that's out there. The audience murmurs in agreement. Sunny crosses her legs, her tone measured but firm. But you can control what you put out there in the first place. Chris looks at her. To a degree, yes. But once it's out there, it takes on a life of its own. Sunny doesn't back down. That's part of having a platform. Chris responds, a bit more intensity creeping in. And I accept that. But accepting it doesn't mean I can't challenge something that's inaccurate. Joy nods slowly. That's fair, but sometimes the challenge feels like resistance. Chris glances at her. Resistance to what? Joy shrugs. To criticism. To the idea that maybe you got something wrong. Chris pauses, then answers carefully. I'm not resistant to criticism. I'm resistant to being told who I am based on a headline. The audience reacts with a mix of claps and thoughtful murmurs. Sunny leans forward again, her voice slightly sharper now. But when multiple people are reacting the same way, it's not just a headline, it's a pattern. That lands. Chris doesn't respond right away. He looks at her, considering. Whoopi watches closely, then gently nudges. That's a strong point. What do you think about that? Chris nods slowly. I think patterns can be real, but they can also be amplified. Sunny raises an eyebrow. Amplified or exposed? A few audience members let out a soft, oh. Chris gives a small, restrained smile. Depends on the situation. Sunny presses. In your situation? Another pause. Chris shifts slightly in his chair. In my situation, I think there's a mix of both. Joy leans back. That's probably the most balanced answer you've given so far. The audience laughs lightly. Sunny doesn't smile this time. But balance isn't always enough. Sometimes people want clarity. Chris looks at her. Clarity about what? Sunny answers without hesitation. About where you stand. About what you actually believe. Not just what you're reacting to. Chris nods slowly. That's fair. Whoopi tilts her head. So give it to us. Right now. No headlines, no clips, just you. Where do you stand? The room goes quiet again. Even the audience seems to hold its breath. Chris leans forward, resting his hands together, speaking more deliberately than before. I believe in listening. I believe in respecting different perspectives. And I believe in being able to speak honestly without being reduced to a label. The audience claps, some louder than others. Sunny watches him closely. And when your honesty conflicts with someone else's experience? Chris answers, steady. Then you talk about it. Like we're doing now. Sunny shakes her head slightly. But not everyone gets a seat at this table. That line shifts the energy again. Chris nods. That's true. Sunny continues, her voice more intense now. So when people speak up from wherever they are, and they feel dismissed, it matters. Chris responds, equally focused. And I'm not trying to dismiss anyone. But I also can't validate something that isn't accurate. Joy interjects quickly. But accuracy can be subjective sometimes. Chris turns to her. Facts aren't. Joy shrugs. Interpretation is. The audience reacts again, this time louder. Whoopi raises a hand, trying to keep the balance. All right, we're getting into philosophy now. The tension doesn't break, though. It just shifts shape. Sunny looks back at Chris. Let me ask you something more direct. Chris nods. Go ahead. Sunny doesn't hesitate. Do you think you've ever contributed to the misunderstanding? That question hangs in the air. Chris exhales slowly, looking down for a brief second before answering. Yes. The audience murmurs, some surprised, some impressed. Sunny follows up immediately. How? Chris looks back up. By assuming people understood my tone. By not always explaining things fully. And by sometimes responding too quickly. That last part gets a noticeable reaction. Joy leans in. Too quickly. Chris nods. Yeah, when you react in the moment, you're not always considering how it's going to land. Whoopi smiles faintly. That's honest. Sunny studies him for a moment. And has that changed? Chris nods. I'm trying to change it. Sunny presses again. Trying or actually changing? Chris doesn't flinch this time. Both. There's a small pause. Joy glances at Sunny. He's holding his ground, I'll give him that. Sunny exhales quietly, then speaks again. But this time her tone shifts just slightly, less sharp, more probing. Because from the outside, it can look like you're more focused on defending yourself than understanding others. Chris responds calmly. And from the inside, it feels like I'm doing both, but only one part is being seen. The audience reacts with a mix of agreement and skepticism. Whoopi leans back, observing. That's the disconnect right there. Sunny nods slowly. Exactly. Chris adds. And that's why conversations like this matter. Because at least here, there's room for nuance. Joy laughs lightly. Nuance on daytime TV. Who would have thought? The audience chuckles, easing the tension just a bit. But Sunny isn't finished. She leans forward one more time, her voice steady but firm. Last question for now. When you walk out of here today, what do you want people to understand about you that they don't right now? Chris pauses longer than before. The room goes completely still. He finally speaks, slower, more deliberate than at any point so far. That I'm not the version of me that exists in fragments online. I'm someone who's still learning, still listening, and still figuring out how to do this better. That lands. The audience breaks into applause, stronger this time, but not unanimous. Sunny nods once, acknowledging the answer, but her expression stays thoughtful. Joy leans back, exhaling. Okay, that was a moment. Whoopi looks out at the audience, then back at the table. Yeah, it was. She glances at Sunny, then at Chris. But I have a feeling we're not done yet. Sunny gives a small, knowing look. Chris sits back, composed, but clearly more affected than when he first walked out. And the conversation is now sitting right on the edge of something even bigger. The energy in the room doesn't drop, it shifts. There's a sense that something real just happened, but also that not everything has been resolved. The audience is still watching closely, some leaning forward, others exchanging quiet reactions with the people next to them. Whoopi takes a breath and looks across the table. All right, before we wrap this up, I want to bring it back to something simple, but important. She turns to Sunny. You've been very clear about accountability. Then she turns to Chris. And you've been very clear about context and intent. She pauses. So what does this actually look like going forward? Not in theory, in real life. Sunny answers first this time, her tone calmer than before but still firm. It looks like listening without immediately responding. It looks like taking a moment to understand why people feel the way they do before defending yourself. Chris nods, not interrupting. Sunny continues. And it looks like recognizing that when you have a platform, even small things can have a big impact. A few audience members clap in agreement. Whoopi looks at Chris. All right. Chris leans forward slightly, his voice steady but more reflective than earlier. And from my side, it looks like continuing to engage, but doing it more thoughtfully. Taking that pause before reacting. And also being okay with not being able to please everyone. Joy nods. That last part is key. Chris adds, because if you try to please everyone, you stop being genuine. And then the criticism just changes shape. It doesn't go away. The audience reacts with a mix of laughter and claps. Sunny gives a small nod. That's true. There's a brief moment where the tension softens. Not gone, but less sharp. Whoopi smiles slightly. Look at that. We found a little common ground. Joy laughs. Don't get too excited. We're still on live TV. The audience laughs, easing the atmosphere just a bit more. But Sunny leans in again, not confrontational, just direct. I'll say this. I appreciate you staying in the conversation. Not everyone does when it gets uncomfortable. Chris nods. I think it's important to stay. Sunny adds, and I hope people watching see that part too. Chris responds, I hope so. There's a pause, and for the first time, it feels less like a standoff and more like a closing reflection. Whoopi looks out toward the audience. This is what these conversations are supposed to be. Not perfect, not always neat, but honest. The audience claps more warmly now. Joy glances at Chris with a half smile. You survived. Chris laughs lightly. Barely. Sunny smiles just a little at that, the first real break in her intensity. Whoopi leans back. All right, we're going to take a quick break. But this conversation? It's definitely not ending here. The camera cuts to the audience clapping as the segment fades out. Off-air, the atmosphere shifts almost immediately. The tension that filled the table loosens, replaced by quieter, more human interactions. Chris exhales and leans back in his chair. That was something. Sunny nods, setting her notes down. It was. There's a brief silence, not awkward, just processing. Chris looks over at her. For what it's worth, I didn't feel attacked. Sunny meets his gaze. That wasn't the goal. Chris nods. I know. Joy chimes in, half joking. Oh, it felt like it sometimes. They all laugh lightly, breaking the last bit of tension. Whoopi stands, stretching slightly. That's what happens when people actually care about what they're saying. Chris smiles. I respect that. Sunny nods once. And I respect you staying in it. There's a small moment of mutual acknowledgement. No big dramatic resolution, just a quiet understanding. Later that day, the clip starts circulating online. Short segments hit social media first. Quick exchanges, sharp lines, the moments where voices overlapped and tension peaked. Within hours, the internet is split. Some users are firmly on Chris's side, posting clips of him saying, I won't accept being misrepresented, calling it composed and reasonable. Others highlight Sunny's line, intent doesn't matter as much as impact, saying she held him accountable in a necessary way. Hashtags begin trending. Discussions grow. Some people praise the conversation for being real and unfiltered. Others argue it exposed deeper issues about how public figures respond to criticism. Clips of the audience reactions start circulating too. The moments of applause, the murmurs, the divided responses. Media outlets pick it up, running headlines about the tense exchange between Chris Hemsworth and Sunny Hostin. Commentators weigh in, debating who won the exchange. Even though, to anyone who watched the full segment, it didn't feel like a win or lose moment. It felt like something more complicated. Behind the scenes, the production team reviews the segment. Producers note the pacing, the escalation, the moments where Whoopi stepped in to keep things balanced. They also noticed something else. The audience engagement was higher than usual. Not just applause, but attention. People weren't just watching. They were thinking. The next morning, the show opens with brief mention of the conversation. Whoopi addresses it directly. A lot of you had something to say about yesterday's discussion. Joy adds, and trust me, we've seen it. Sunny nods. And we appreciate it, even when you disagree. The audience claps. They don't rehash the entire debate, but they acknowledge it, letting viewers know the conversation mattered beyond that one moment. Back online, longer clips begin to trend. The full context, the slower parts, the moments where both sides paused and reflected. Some viewers change their opinions after seeing the full exchange. Others don't, but the conversation continues. And for Chris, in the days that follow, interviews feel a little different. Reporters bring up the segment, not aggressively, but curiously. How did that feel? What did you take away from it? His answers are more measured now, a little more reflective. Not completely different, but noticeably adjusted. Back at the table, the hosts continue their usual rhythm in the days ahead. But there's a subtle shift. The conversation they had lingers, not as conflict, but as a reference point. A reminder of what happens when things get real. And for the audience watching at home, it becomes one of those moments people go back to. Not because it was explosive, but because it felt honest. If you watched that exchange, what did you think? Was Chris Hemsworth right to defend himself? Or did Sunny Hostin make the stronger argument about accountability? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories, real conversations, and moments that actually matter.